Hi, I'm Bryan Post, Clinical Director for Parents in Training, a nonprofit here in Northern California. And myself, along with Rose Baker, 5 years ago, started a Wraparound program, now known as the Leaf Company, to help serve at-risk adopted families. And this is my opportunity, after 25 years of working with adopted and foster children, trauma, and challenging families all around the world, to share with you the things I've learned in 5 years of providing wraparound services in Northern California. The first thing I'd like to tell you is it's a lot harder than I ever imagined. This has probably been one of the most difficult undertakings of my entire professional career. When I was 25 years old, I started my first intensive in-home agency. So I've been doing this a long time. I'm 50 years old, and I've done it all around the world. What's so challenging? Well, I worked with a lot of the families initially myself. I traveled from Del Norte to Chico to Sacramento, working with the families. I hired the coaches, I recruited the coaches, I trained the coaches, placed them in the homes, monitored them, built the whole team, and we really got after it. But as we started serving families, more families started coming out looking for help. We kept hearing the stories and we kept getting the request. And so I had to really dial down and build a team to really be able to serve the need. Well, that was probably one of the first challenges. It's really hard to duplicate me. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've been doing it at the highest level. Some of you've read my book, From Fear to Love. It's sold over 1 million copies. I've authored 14 books. I've been doing this for a long time, and taking what I know and embedding that into my team was a lot harder than I ever imagined. It wasn't just that. It was and is the infusing of the passion for which I've always approached this work. Many of you know that I was in foster care. I was an adopted child, had an adopted sister, grew up in a really conflictual home with very well-meaning and well-intentioned parents, but they really struggled. And that's not unlike what I've seen throughout the last 5 years, or even throughout my career for that matter. But the understanding that I have when it comes to working with adopted families and their children is rooted in my own upbringing. And so I look at things differently, I think about things differently, and I just have a different understanding. And so what I didn't realize is that as I started building my team, I had to also help those individuals overcome and understand at a deeper level some of their own challenges, some of their own family-based challenges, some of their own history, some of their own stories. My team, and there's now 150 of us. So we have 150 members providing wraparound services to families throughout Northern California. They go through the most intensive training of anything that's out there. We now have a training that spans a whole month of, and we call it Leaf University, of doing education, emotional process work, shadowing, group processing, more education, and then after that, they come back and they do more emotional work. And the reason for that is because I know that when we walk into some of these homes, we're going to be faced with a lot of pain, a lot of stress, a lot of trauma, a lot of fear. And so we have to go through a tremendous amount of training and really stress, if you will, in order to grow to become the individuals necessary to serve our families at the highest level. And that has been really difficult because it's setting the bar for a whole nother standard of excellence and performance when it comes to working with families. We're now one of those wraparound providers who sometimes we hire the wrong people, and sometimes we don't get the passion that we need in the person who shows up as one of our representatives, and we drop the ball. Sometimes we just mess up. We've messed up plenty as we have striven to be the best provider of this service in all of Northern California. We have not always gotten it right. It's hard. It's hard to get people trained at the level that they need and to be willing to go and face the pain that they have to face. That's challenge number one. Challenge number two, but what I've learned is we always focus on the family and we always start with the parents. We don't go straight to the children. Most of the families that we work with have been through years of mental health counseling. Many of their kids have been in residential. They've received all kinds of input and feedback from professionals and teachers and friends and families. And typically all of it is traditionally based. And I refer to traditional based practices as fear-based practices. And those repetitive experiences of communication change the brain. So after years of going through all those services, we show up at the doorstep of many of these families and they are products of their conditioning. Not only are they products of the conditioning they've received in mental health, but they're products from their own environments. There aren't very many mental health services that are focused around children that work with the parents first. Why? Because one of my trauma support specialists said to me, she said, it's really hard working with parents. And I said to her, and that's exactly why we do it. Because that's where healing starts. We don't blame our parents. We realize that healing starts with our parents because they are the single biggest catalyst to change in the child's life 24/7. But we have to go all the way back to their childhoods. We have to help them explore their pain. And how many adults want to do that these days? Well, if you look at mental health, there's not very many. Everyone wants to jump over the parents and focus right on the child. In fact, pull up any mental health provider right now, any mental health service, and just do a quick analysis and see how many start with the parents. Yeah, the initial conversations with the parent, but after that, the parents are escorted out the door and then all the therapy is centered around the child. When you send a child to residential treatment, where are the parents? They're on Zoom. But then what's happening the other 7 days of the week, the months that the child's there? The parents show up for a Zoom session, but who's actually working with the parents to understand their own histories and how they became who they are and how they show up the way they do when their children are the most stressed out, having the biggest behavior challenges, and needing the parents' love and security the most? No one's doing that, and that's what we do. That is a primary catalyst to all that we do. Now, people are always talking about, well, what makes Leaf different from every other wraparound provider? I never compared what we do to other wraparound services because I never wanted to be in that same box. Our whole mission is to reduce the stress of the parents so that we can train them on how to become therapeutically available to their children, because that's where healing starts. Now, when you start with that process, you're going to be met with a tremendous amount of resistance because most people don't want to do their own work. And so it's easy to push back at that. And especially if you've spent 10 years in mental health where every professional around you before you come to us or before we show up on your doorstep has in some way, either consciously or unconsciously, told you that your child is the problem. When the psychiatrist medicates your child and the psychologist labels your child, what they're unconsciously telling you is that your child's the problem. Now, then you go for another 5 or 10 years. And then here we come and we want to start educating you first on how to look at things differently, starting with yourself. That is so hard. It's hard work for the parents to have to go through the training that we place in front of them and the things that we ask of them. Not everyone's ready for that. So not every family is a good fit for the service that we're offering. And that's another thing that I've had to learn over the last 5 years. One of the other things that I've learned in 5 years of doing wraparound services is as we grow as an organization, we have growing pains that come with running a business. And I never got into social services and working with families for the standpoint of running a business, but that's exactly what it is. We have budgets to adhere to. We have organizations and payees, pay sources that we have to be responsible to. We have to be stewards of the resources that are provided to us to run the operation. We have 150 members of our team serving 181 families. So the more families that we serve, the more team members that we have to add, the more training we have to go through. And that is its own very challenging growth process. It was different when it was just me. But now there's 150 me's and the training of those 150. And we have to continue to hold the culture. We have to continue to hold the mission and hold the vision and hold the values for our organization as we grow. And that's just not easy. There's a lot of challenges that come along with that. The other thing I've learned in 5 years of doing wraparound services in Northern California is that, man, when you take a family who has generational blueprints for stress and trauma and give you a perspective of how we do what we do and why we do it. Just one of our families, when we went to work with them and do the assessment, their living environment, the place they were living in, was considered a toxic, uninhabitable environment. That's number one. Number two, there was a sexual predator still living in the home. Number three, the grandfather was in and out of the hospital. And the first thing we had to do is we had to get those boys out of that environment. They could not live in that environment. So we had to help them relocate to another home. The second thing we had to do is we had to get that sexual predator put in jail. The third thing we had to do is we had to find a different adoptive parent to raise those children. And we were able to find a family member, which is fantastic. And most of you take a breath of relief, a sigh of relief, and you're like, oh, thank goodness. Well, families come with generational blueprints. All of the family was traumatized. So finding the new adoptive parent who was a family member, we were actually pulling her from the same generational trauma. So then pulling them together, even though they were relocated into a better home, even though the sexual predator wasn't there, we still had to help that adoptive mom to teenage boys, learn a whole new model of how to relate to herself and these children, teenage children, mind you, in order to help put them on a better path for a successful outcome in their life. It's almost impossible to do. The odds are completely stacked against us. But when you have a team of individuals who are committed to the principles and the power of love, who are committed to facing down trauma, who are committed to answering phone calls at midnight and making visits to the family in the middle of the night and navigating through police officers and runaways, when you have a team that's committed to that doesn't give up just because it's difficult, then you eventually see that family start to have a trickle of success. And you know, Wraparound is approved for 18 months. And we hear some social workers say, well, they extend families. And I understand that from a kind of a budgetary standpoint. you're looking at a budget and you give this family 18 months of funding and you're like, in 18 months, they should be fixed. Without consideration that these boys have gone years. Let's say they're 15, 16, and 17. They've gone 15, 16, and 17 years of first generation trauma, raised by second generation trauma, that was raised by third generation trauma, and you don't repair that in 18 months. Not only do you not repair that, but you don't repair years of negative mental health conditioning in 18 months. It's just not a feasible thing. And that's why adoption assistance in California is such an amazing thing, because these families are entitled to the help. The law was written to serve the families. It was written to keep families in homes. So when you're able to have a team that is equipped and willing, not just equipped, but willing to go through the pain and the struggle with these families, and they may not make it to the positive outcome in 18 months. And thank goodness there are counties and there are individuals within the state that realize that healing is a journey it's not time dependent. And they continue to help fund this family. And then this family goes another 18 months. Now you've got 3 years of intensive services wrapped around a family where, guess what? The children aren't getting sent to residential treatment. They're not getting sent out of state. They're staying in the homes. They're going through the pain. The adoptive mom is struggling and suffering, and she's doing the hard work, and she's crying, and she's having sleepless nights, and she's having to deal with difficult teenage boys, and the team is around them going through the same process and not giving up. And then you have one that turns 18, goes into independent living. You have another that then turns 17, almost 18, who's now graduated from high school. You have another one who's on a trajectory not to go back to residential, which is where we brought him from, but he's on a trajectory. He's going to be able to stay in his home until he's 18 and go into his own transitional living. That is rewarding. That's what I've learned in 5 years of doing wraparound services in Northern California, that regardless of how difficult it can be, regardless of how frustrating it can be, regardless of how many losses you have, we build our team up. We love them. I love them. I love every member of our team. And sometimes they're just not the right fit. Sometimes we're not the right fit for a home, and even though we've loved them, we're not the right fit, and they've got to move on, or we've got to let them go so we can make room for other families. So we suffer through that process, but it's worth it when you realize at the end of the day, you have recreated the power of love in a family. And you have helped them to overcome generational blueprints of trauma. And you've helped start to recreate a whole new legacy for what's possible for a family. Man, that's what's worth it. And that is our commitment to the families in Northern California and throughout California as we start to expand down to Central California. Our commitment is unlike any other wraparound provider. We are going to love these families, and we are going to keep loving, and we're going to love even when things don't always work out right. We're going to love even when there's negativity in the environment, when people don't like what we stand for, and they don't like what we do, and they cast stones. We're going to keep loving, and we're going to keep showing up, and that is our commitment. That is our commitment to the social workers in the counties that love some of these families as much as we do. That is our commitment to the families that we serve. That's our commitment to the professionals that we stand alongside, because there's some amazing professionals in this community that we've had a fantastic opportunity to work with. That's our commitment. And so I want to thank you for giving me an opportunity to just share with you some things I've learned in 5 years of doing wraparound in Northern California. And I want you to know, we're going to be here for another 5 years, and we're going to impact even more lives, and we're going to keep kids in adoptive homes. We're going to keep kids from going to residential treatment centers and from getting sent out of state. And we're going to keep adoptive families intact. And we're going to keep spreading the power of love where there has been so much hurt and so much trauma and so much fear. God bless you.